when one 8-year-old Danika Lewis stepped into the pristine halls of Manhattan's most elite boxing gym. The room fell silent, not out of respect, but disbelief. She wore faded sneakers, carried a scuffed gym bag, and had the kind of presence that didn't belong, at least not in a place where monthly fees cost more than her family's entire income back in Jamaica. Lost, sweetheart? Mocked Veronica Hayes, two-time world boxing champion and social media icon with 1 million followers, and a reputation for humiliating those she deemed beneath her. Danika's eyes flicked to her cracked phone. I thought this was the youth scholarship program. The gym erupted in laughter. We train athletes here, not charity cases, Veronica snapped. What no one knew was that Danika wasn't just another immigrant with big dreams. She had spent her childhood surviving underground street fights in Kingston under the name Stormfire, a legend whispered with fear and awe. Now, working 16 hours a day cleaning Manhattan offices to survive, the scholarship was her only way back into a ring, not to fight for money, but for dignity. Coach Thomas Reed, the gym's grizzled owner, stepped out of his office, silencing the jeers. She's on the list, he said firmly. The tension didn't break, it thickened. Because Veronica had already made up her mind. She'd make an example out of Danika, but she had no idea she had just lit the fuse on a storm that had been waiting for years to strike back. Veronica Hayes, the undefeated world boxing champion and self-proclaimed queen of the ring, smirked as she circled Danika Lewis, the 8-year-old newcomer with fire in her eyes and holes in her sneakers. You want to train with us? Fine, Veronica purred, her voice laced with venom. Let's make it official. 3 rounds. You last. You stay. You don't. Well, I'm sure there's a mop waiting for you somewhere. The gym fell deathly quiet. No one had dared challenge Veronica in years, not in her domain. Cameras were already rolling. Veronica's Instagram Live lit up with thousands of viewers, cheering for blood. She wasn't just planning to win, she was preparing to humiliate. Danika didn't flinch. She didn't blink. I accept. Coach Thomas Reed, a veteran trainer who'd seen too many promising young athletes crushed before they bloomed, watched Danika closely. There was something about her. Not arrogance, not recklessness, but a kind of stillness, like a predator waiting for the right second to pounce. In the locker room, Thomas pulled her aside. You don't have to do this, kid. It's not worth getting hurt over some influencer's ego. Danika didn't even look up as she laced up her borrowed gloves. She thinks I'm here to play. Thomas frowned. And you're not? She met his eyes, calm and steady. I'm here because I have something she never will. What's that? Hunger. The word didn't just hang in the air, it cut through it. In 30 years, Thomas had trained Olympians, champions, warriors. But the last time he'd heard that word said like that, it was from a fighter who had clawed his way out of a refugee camp to win gold. Danika continued warming up, her movements sharp, precise. Her stance wasn't that of a beginner. Her footwork didn't match someone who learned from YouTube. She moved like someone who had been fighting long before technique had a name. Who are you really? Thomas whispered to himself. Just then, the gym door opened, and a tall man in his 52nd walked in, his knuckles scarred, his gait heavy with the past. His name was Wendell Lewis, Danika's uncle. He had flown in from Florida as soon as he heard what was happening. Stormfire, he called out softly. Danika turned. Her face softened, then steeled again. Thomas looked between them. You two know each other? Wendell nodded. Since she was 8, I trained her in the alleys of Kingston. She doesn't talk about it, but that girl there, she was the most feared fighter in the streets. By 12, grown, men wouldn't challenge her. By 16, she vanished. Swore off fighting when she got her visa to come here. Said she wanted to clean offices, not break faces. But now, Thomas asked. Wendell sighed. Now someone's trying to humiliate her. And there's one thing you don't do. To Stormfire. You don't disrespect her dignity. Back on the main floor, Veronica was already streaming her pre-fight hype. Look at this. Girl, she laughed, pointing toward the ring. Came in here looking like she raided a thrift store. I hope she doesn't cry when I crack her ribs. Thousands were watching live. Crush her. Show her who's boss. Put that immigrant in. Her place, the comments flooded in. Danika heard none of it. She stepped into the ring, quiet, measured. Her heartbeat was slow, steady. Her mind, razor sharp. Veronica strutted to the center, gloved hands raised high for the cameras. Ready to learn a luby. Lesson? She sneered. Always, Danika answered, her voice almost gentle. Thomas's gut twisted. He'd seen this before, that calm. It wasn't fear. It was calculation. Kid, he whispered under his breath. What are you about to do? Danika didn't answer, but the storm already forming behind her eyes said everything. She wasn't there to prove she belonged. She was there to remind them all why people like her survive what others can't even imagine. As the referee called both women to the center, Wendell stood at the edge of the ring and muttered to Thomas, "She's not here to win. She's here to make sure no one ever underestimates her again." The bell rang. Veronica Hayes lunged forward with the confidence of a champion and the cruelty of a predator playing with its food. Her first jab cut through the air, followed by a lightning-quick cross. The crowd gasped. Not because it landed, but because it didn't. Danika Lewis wasn't there anymore. She had moved a millisecond before impact, her body gliding with a fluidity that seemed unnatural, like smoke, or wind, or lightning just before it strikes. What the hell? Veronica muttered, her brow furrowed. She launched a second flurry left hook, right uppercut, pivot jab. All missed. Danika didn't respond with a counter. Not yet. She didn't need to. She was studying, reading, breaking down every inch of Veronica's footwork, rhythm, breathing patterns. Her eyes weren't filled with fear. They were calculating, assessing, preparing. Veronica growled. "Stay still, girl." Another barrage came, angrier, faster. A full-body commitment. A sloppy cross gave Danika her opening. Crack. A left hook from Danika landed squarely on the side of Veronica's face. The sound echoed through the gym like a firecracker. Veronica staggered back, stunned. It was the first time in years anyone had touched her like that, and it had come from a girl she'd called a social project. The gym erupted, not with laughter this time, but with gasps, whispers. "Did you see that? Wait, who is she?" Veronica blinked, shook her head, and tried to reset her stance. Danika didn't press. She didn't need to. She waited again. 2 minutes in, the audience was silent, entranced. Danika moved not like a rookie, but like a maestro conducting a symphony of movement. Every shift of her feet was intentional. Every sway of her torso avoided a blow by inches. Her counters were sharp, controlled. No wasted energy. This wasn't self-defense. This was surgical deconstruction. Veronica's punches began to slow. Sweat poured down her face. Her arms started to drop, ever so slightly. She was breathing through her mouth now. Danika stepped in. 1-2 combination. Jab, slip, body shot. Veronica grunted as her ribs absorbed the blow. She tried to clinch. Danika pivoted out. In the corner, Coach Thomas Reed turned to Wendell Lewis, stunned. "She's dismantling her," Thomas whispered. "Like she's done this 1,000 times." "She has," Wendell replied. "But never with cameras, never with rules. This is her soft version." Veronica's trainer shouted instructions, but she wasn't listening anymore. She was chasing shadows, and the crowd was beginning to turn. People who had jeered Danika now started chanting her name. Even the other fighters, some who had dismissed her the moment she walked in, were now nodding in respect. Veronica lunged once more, desperate. Her punch fell short. Danika whispered, just loud enough for Veronica to hear, "You called me a charity case." Crack. A jab straight to the nose. And a joke. Crack. Right cross to the cheekbone. "You said I didn't belong." Crack. 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 Left hook, right body shot, left uppercut. Veronica stumbled backward, arms flailing. "Stormfire," someone in the crowd whispered. Wendell smiled. "She's back." The bell rang to end round 1, but the damage was done. Veronica slumped onto her stool, chest heaving, eyes dazed. "What is happening?" she whispered to her coach. Blood trickling from her lip. "Reality," he muttered. "That girl isn't a beginner. She's the storm you didn't see coming." Across the ring, Danika stood calmly, not even winded. She didn't sit. She didn't sip water. She just stared ahead, focused, serene. When round 2 began, Veronica hesitated. She knew now. This wasn't going to be a win. It was going to be survival. She stepped forward anyway. Pride demanded it. Danika met her with grace and fire. Veronica tried to switch tactics, go low, clinch, body-to-body combat. But Danika adapted, instantly, turning each attempt into an opportunity, a feint, a slip, a punishing counter. Then came the moment that would be replayed millions of times online. Veronica swung wide with a desperate right hook. Danika ducked, stepped inside, and unleashed 4 punches in less than 2 seconds. Jab, cross, left hook, right uppercut. Boom. Veronica hit the mat like a toppled statue. The gym erupted into chaos. Phones were raised. Voices screamed. Journalists rushed forward. But all Danika did was step back, lower her gloves, and look down at the fallen champion, not with malice, but clarity. Coach Thomas called out the count. 10. Knockout. Veronica's team rushed to help her up, but she didn't rise. Her legs were jelly. Her pride shattered. Danika approached slowly, leaned down and whispered, "You said I'd learned something today." "I did. I learned that dignity doesn't flinch, and neither does Stormfire." She turned and walked back to her corner as the crowd roared her name. Thomas looked on, stunned. Why didn't she tell us who she was from the beginning? Wendell crossed his arms. Because people like Veronica need to build their own pedestal before they fall off it. 3 months later, the world had changed, especially for Danika Lewis and Veronica Hayes. Once the reigning queen of boxing and the darling of sponsors, Veronica now lived alone in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. Gone were the high-rise views of Miami Beach, the endless press tours, and the 7-figure sponsorships. Instead, her phone barely rang. Her inbox, once flooded with brand deals, was empty. The viral video of her being knocked out by a girl she'd called a charity case had reached over 50 million views in a single week. Worse than the knockout was the narrative that followed. Veronica Hayes, the face of arrogance, the voice of prejudice, brought down not by brute force, but by her own ignorance. Nike dropped her. Gatorade cut ties. Even her own management team issued a public statement distancing themselves. Her apology video on YouTube, tearful, shaky, framed in front of a plain white wall, was met with scorn. The comments were merciless. Too little, too late. Asterisk. You didn't lose because she was lucky. You lost because you underestimated the respite. Wrong girl. Stormfire lit you up. Meanwhile, Danika Lewis had become a global sensation. She had signed a $2 million deal with Golden Gloves Promotions for her first 3 professional fights. Under Armour launched a campaign titled Earned, Not Given, featuring her rise from Bronx janitor to boxing prodigy. ESPN aired a 2-part documentary, Stormfire, The Girl Who Silenced a Champion, which became their most watched sports feature of the quoting of the Reddit year. At the heart of it all, Danika remained grounded. She refused to move out of her small Bronx apartment just yet, choosing instead to focus on her new foundation, Lightning Dreams, an initiative aimed at training and funding young female athletes from underserved communities. In just 3 months, The program had funded over 300 girls across 5 cities. Dignity isn't a luxury, Danika said during a televised interview. It's a birthright. And no, one should have to beg for it. She turned down offers from reality shows and brand endorsements that didn't align with her values. When asked why she wasn't flaunting her success on social media, she simply replied, "Because when you fight your whole life to be seen as human, fame feels like dessert, not the meal." Back at Thomas Reed's gym, everything had changed. The once overlooked scholarship program now had a waiting list over 500 names long. Donations poured in from around the placed world. Kids from housing projects to border towns were applying. Coach Thomas himself became something of a media figure, his phone ringing daily with interview requests and offers for speaking engagements. But he always turned them down with a laugh. "I didn't discover Danika," he'd say. "She discovered herself. I just made space." Every Friday, Danika returned to the gym, not to train, but to mentor. She taught footwork to 12-year-olds and spoke with the quiet girls hiding in the corners. "I used to stand where you are," she'd whisper. "Don't shrink. The world is already too small for women like us." And as for Veronica Hayes, she tried to bounce back. A minor podcast invited her for an exclusive interview. She accepted, desperate to reshape her image. "I was wrong," she admitted. "Danika Lewis wasn't just a fighter. She was a woman I never took the time to understand. I let pride blind me. And, in doing so, I lost everything." But the damage had been done. Brands didn't want her. Promoters wouldn't touch her. And the internet? The internet never forgets. Clips of her apology were spliced with footage of her pre-fight arrogance, turned into memes. "Arrogance meets karma" became a trending hashtag. And yet, Danika never responded. When asked about Veronica during an interview with Sports Illustrated, Danika shook her head. "I don't carry anger. That kind of weight slows you down. I've got too many people to lift to let bitterness hold me back." Instead, she focused on what mattered. She returned to Jamaica and opened the first Lightning Dreams training center in the same neighborhood where she once fought for scraps to feed her family. During the grand opening, she stood in front of a crowd of reporters, local children, and government officials and spoke with the same power she brought into the ring. "This story isn't about revenge. It's about transformation. I didn't win because I hit harder. I won because I refused to believe that where I come from defines where I'm going." The applause was thunderous. A few months later, Danika Lewis, aka Stormfire, won the Unified World Championship, knocking out her opponent in the second round, the same round she had taken down Veronica. Her victory speech wasn't about titles. "I want to thank the people who laughed at me, mocked me, and told me to dream smaller," she said, sweat still glistening on her forehead. "You didn't break me. You built me. You reminded me that power isn't given. It's earned. Every bruise, every late night, every no, that turned into fuel." Back in her apartment, Veronica watched the fight on a grainy live stream, alone. And as the referee raised Danika's hand, the former champion whispered something no one would hear, something too late to fix, but just in time to feel. "She became everything I told her she couldn't be." And the world clapped. Not just for a fighter, but for a woman who turned underestimation into elevation and humiliation into history. 6 months after the most watched knockout in boxing history, Danika Lewis, better known now across the globe as Stormfire, stood before a sea of cameras, young women, and proud community members in the heart of Kingston, Jamaica. Behind her was the newly finished Lightning Dreams Sports and Leadership Center, a massive training facility built not with corporate ego, but with purpose. This was where it had all begun. The dusty streets where she once fought to put food on the table. The cracked walls that had witnessed both her fists and her tears. The place where she swore she'd never throw another punch, unless it was for something greater than survival. Now, she was returning not as a fighter, but as a beacon. "I stand here today," she began, gripping the podium, not to celebrate a championship, but to declare that no child from this street should ever again feel like their worth is defined by poverty or by how loud the world laughs at them. The crowd roared. In just half a year, Danika had gone from an anonymous scholarship hopeful to a unified world champion, activist, and philanthropist. Her story had touched continents. Time magazine named her Person of the Year. Her TED Talk, titled The Punch That Rewrote My Story, had racked up 40 million views in 2 weeks. But behind the fame, the belt, and the accolades was the same girl who once swept offices at 2 a.m. just to pay rent on a shared Bronx room. Her foundation, Lightning Dreams, had since expanded to 5 countries, offering free combat, training, mentorship, and education scholarships to over 5,000 girls. And the ripple effect was just beginning. Boxing promoters, once obsessed with flashy arrogance, now scouted authenticity. Brands pivoted their campaigns from glam to grit. Even the sports media had changed, opting to highlight voices like Danika's that spoke not just with victory, but with vision. As she finished her speech that day, she motioned to a bronze statue unveiled beside her. It was a life-size replica of her mid-fight gloves raised, eyes steady, legs grounded, not in glory, but in readiness. At its base were the words she had spoken right after defeating Veronica Hayes. Respect isn't earned by color, nationality, or bank account. It's earned by character. She turned to the young girls gathered up front, some barefoot, many holding worn notebooks, with dreams scribbled across their pages. Don't fight to prove others wrong, she said softly. Fight to prove yourself right. And somewhere, far away, Veronica Hayes watched it all on a cracked tablet in her now quiet apartment in Brooklyn. There were no calls from promoters anymore. No cameras. No sponsorships. Just headlines that reminded the world of her fall and Danika's rise. In a rare moment of self-awareness, Veronica whispered to no one, "That girl didn't just beat me. She replaced me." But Danika had never been interested in replacement. She was building something entirely different. In her next televised fight, one that sold out Madison Square Garden in 11 minutes, Danika walked into the ring not to thunderous hip-hop or hype, but to the soft recorded voice of her late mother, reading Psalm 23-inch Jamaican patois. The moment brought tears to fans and commentators alike. She didn't need intimidation. Her presence was power. The fight ended in the second round. Another knockout. Another statement. But Danika didn't gloat. Instead, she helped her opponent off the floor and whispered, "Use this. You're better than what they said about you." It became her signature move. Not the punch, but the aftercare. Meanwhile, her uncle Wendell Lewis, the man who had once pulled her out of street fights and taught her discipline, now worked as the head coach of Lightning Dreams. His scarred hands had gone from bandaging wounds to building futures. "Remember what I told you," he'd often say to the girls before training. "Hunger makes monsters or miracles. It depends on who's feeding it." Coach Thomas Reed, now retired, often joked during interviews, "Danika didn't just change the gym. She changed me. I used to believe in hard fists. Now I believe in soft beginnings." Her story was adapted into a documentary by Ava DuVernay, and later, a feature film. But Danika requested one thing: don't turn me into a superhero. Tell the story of the days I almost quit, of the nights I cried in silence. That's where the real fighter lived. The film ended with real footage from the gym, the moment Veronica hit the mat, and the moment Danika chose dignity over gloating. Audiences rose to their feet in theaters across the planks for Camber. World, not for violence, but for justice. And on the 1-year anniversary of that viral fight, Danika returned to Thomas Reed's gym, now renamed Stormfire Boxing Academy, for a special event. Veronica was invited, but declined. Danika addressed the new scholarship class, 20 girls, all standing in the same spot where she once stood, unsure if they belonged. "You do," she told them, locking eyes with each one. Even if the world doesn't see it yet, I do, and I promise you, your storm is coming. She raised her gloves, not for a match, but as a symbol. And the world watching Liv understood something powerful. The greatest knockouts don't happen in the ring. They happen when someone takes every insult, every rejection, every humiliation, and turns it into a legacy that no one can silence. In the end, Danika Lewis didn't just win a fight. She rewrote the definition of strength. What started as a cruel attempt to humiliate her became the turning point that uplifted thousands. She didn't retaliate with arrogance or anger. She responded with grace, discipline, and dignity. While her opponent, Veronica Hayes, spiraled into shame and regret, Danika turned pain into purpose. Her fists spoke in the ring, but her heart spoke afterward, building gyms, mentoring girls, and changing the system that once rejected her. The world didn't fall in love with Danika because she knocked someone out. The world followed her because she stood up, with pride, not pridefulness, with strength, not spite. Her greatest victory wasn't the title belt. It was showing millions that no matter how underestimated you are, you don't need to prove your worth to those who don't see it. You prove it to yourself. Never let someone else's opinion define your limits. Sometimes, being underestimated is the gift that reveals your true power. The world might try to silence you, but your story told with truth and dignity can echo louder than any punch. If this story moved you like it moved us, don't just watch in silence. Comment below. You ever been underestimated? How did you rise? Your voice matters. And if you believe in stories that uplift, inspire, and empower, subscribe now and ring below that bell so you never miss the next fight for dignity. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we pass on the flame. Let's light the world together.